the biggest thing I see is that the demo is always perfect, especially because, that's kind of where the deal is won or lost. You either get to the next level or you don't with that. But the thing about it is the demo and the conversation leading up to the demo, that's really only about 5 to 10% of the work that's actually required in order to make an enterprise rollout work.
Really, AI in production is not the problem. It is what we do and how we implement it.
One of the little tricks that you can do whenever you design an AI system is for every decision that it makes, make it give you the justification as to why it made that decision as well. And even if that isn't something that goes outward, if that gets put in a log or something, this does make a situation where the LLM has to self-correct or self-justify, and that can cut down on hallucination rate.
Having or not having access to the same amount of data that is used in production, it makes a difference or not.
If there's some kind of, you want to have as close to the real thing as you possibly can if you can't have the real thing.
Welcome to the Human Protocol, the podcast about staying human while building the future. I am your host, Michael Solomon. Today we're talking about the gap that nobody puts in a slide deck, which is the implementation gap, especially in times of AI implementations. The place where AI will look very perfect, but no one really knows what it takes to put it in the business and implement it and then run it. Because really, AI in production is not the problem. It is what we do and how we implement it. So this episode will be a practical map for everyone that's trying to get from pilots to production, right? Without wasting on budget, what it works, what it doesn't work. And with us today, we have our friend Isaac Hicks. Isaac, welcome to the Human Protocol.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I'll be looking forward to having this conversation. And to kick things off, Isaac, I would like to see if you can give us an overview of who Isaac is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a technology implementer and operator, particularly in the AI space. I've been working in the mid-market, so that's companies between 5 million to 100 million for the last 5 years. So I've built dozens of applications, handled software migrations, done pretty much everything under the sun related to operations in mid-market organizations. I've also served enterprises, done major technology migrations, and I've also helped a couple of startups build their initial MVP and pilots to raise money and get to the next level.
So you are the guy we wanted to talk about. So let's kick things off, Isaac, with getting your thought on really why do you think most enterprise AI initiatives, they fail after the demos? What can you tell us about what you have experienced on those implementations with other organizations?
So the biggest thing I see is that the demo is always perfect, right? That's always what gets polished up. That's always what the most kind of important part is whenever a company is looking to vend to an enterprise, especially because, that's kind of where the deal is won or lost. You either get to the next level or you don't with that. But the thing about it is the demo and the conversation leading up to the demo, that's really only about 5 to 10% of the work that's actually required in order to make an enterprise rollout work. And once you get into the details, things like requirements gathering, understanding edge cases, understanding exactly what adoption rates are going to look like across the organization, how this is going to be rolled out, and what the real-time usage is going to look like until that's really mapped out, schemaed out, and set up in a way where you can respond to unknown unknowns and edge cases that'll come up. The project is very premature, and what I see is a lot of projects that remain in that premature state and then move forward in time and really never get to the level of specification they need to make something work in runtime in an actual production use case.
When you and your company are brought into these conversations, is it at the beginning? Is it at the middle because they need you to fix something that is going very wrong? What are the different flavors that you're getting out there?
Yeah, so I get a little bit of both. I would say that we're about 50-50 on either starting from the very beginning and working with people from the idea stage all the way through to go live, and then coming into a project that is halfway built, 3/4 of the way built, wasn't built properly. There was some kind of falling out with the original vending team, and then we come in to save the day, so to speak. And so we're very familiar with both workflows.
And is there anything in common as far as trends or insights that you have seen For example, when organizations call you for the first time to go from working on the idea with them, what are the things that you think are important for organizations to have in mind before they reach out as an implementation company like yours, for example?
So I think that you have to have a very good idea of exactly what it is you want to do, who's going to be affected, the processes that are going to be affected. All of this has to be very well understood and very clear. And a lot of organizations I talk to, they come into the conversation ready to build something, but once we get to talking, it's really more that we need to understand exactly what the problem is that we're trying to solve in the first place and how we're trying to solve it, because a lot of assumptions get made very early on that seem very obvious. But the thing about artificial intelligence is a lot of the ways that you get value are actually very counterintuitive. So it's fairly common that we'll get into a conversation where there's just not an understanding of the true level of due diligence that needs to be done on the process side internally to understand what it is that we're doing in the first place and what problem we're trying to solve. Because a lot of the times, what I'll see is an organization has a plan for what needs to be done, but that plan is based on assumptions that if they do that, it's going to solve the problem. And then once we interrogate that problem, it actually isn't going to solve that problem, or they're trying to solve the problem in the wrong way. And that is a very insidious issue that you'll see blow up much later after a ton of work has been done if you don't catch it very early on. Is this actually the solution fit for the problem that we're having in the first place?
That makes me think that's why it's also so important that you find the right partner to all of these kids. The last thing you want, as you are saying, is wasting time, resources, time, energy, money, finding out that where you were trying to accomplish is not really the way to do that. And organizations and projects, especially project teams, as you were saying, I think sometimes they are trying to find solutions for problems that they have that may not be the right tool or the right technology for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the very common thing that we see a lot of actually, and this is the perfect ideation of how something that seems could go right actually does go wrong, is a lot of people want to expand their marketing. They want to expand their cold outbound. They want to push cold outbound farther. And so their idea is, okay, we're going to set up an operation where we're able to find whatever trigger points, whatever's going on with our market. And we're able to reach out to these people automatically, do follow ups automatically, do all of this stuff automatically. And that sounds great up front. Why spend more time on initial outreach? But if you don't have your offer dialed in properly, if you don't have your top of funnel dialed in properly, if you are sending messages that are attempting to be personalized, but really have just scraped websites and say, oh, well, I know that you did XYZ thing from your website. Not only does the person who opened that email know that it's AI generated and is probably not going to respond, but it actually hurts you. It goes in the opposite direction because if you are scaling a bad process, you scale a mistake instead.
Hmm.
And, we've done many initiatives where we come in and the problem is, oh, hey, we blew through 10,000 people in our target market and we didn't get a single response. What happened? And then you dig into it and half the emails went to spam because that wasn't set up properly. And of the emails that didn't go to spam, you had 20% unsubscribers because your targeting wasn't right. There's all sorts of things that go into that.
So many things to think about, right? And take it into consideration when looking at that thing. It all gets back to the very basic, which is planning. And I talk to this also to everyone. Planning is really what's gonna take you to the next level, right? The more you plan, the more you can anticipate what's gonna happen. And I think organizations, especially big organizations, I believe sometimes they're not so good at planning and trying to lay out how is it that it's going to happen, how is it that they're going to get from point A to point B. And especially with these projects, planning is also key to the success. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Isaac, there is always a lot of conversation, and especially in this conversation around AI. And we see companies and organizations cutting costs, cutting costs, cutting costs. Some say AI, others don't say AI, but it's everybody's looking at the return on investment. And I think for any business owner, at the end of the day, we all look into what is going to be our ROI in all these things, right? What's going to happen after we implement this in production? And some people, they look at ROI just as a cost saving, which, it's usually the short-term gain that people get from the stock markets for the most part, right? If you cut costs or if you save, it's probably your stock. It's mostly to educate business leaders. And what is it in it for them that it's not only the number that they could be looking at?
Yeah, so there's two sides to the ROI equation whenever you're looking at an AI implementation, and I think most business owners only look at the first side. So the
Mhm.
first side, the one that we're very familiar with, is where can I save time? What processes can I improve upon? Where, a process that took 6 hours now takes one, something that took 40 hours now takes 10. That's pretty straight up. And a lot of business owners, when they're looking at this, the way that they try to associate the ROI is okay. So if I had 30 working hours at an average cost of $37 an hour, then $30 times $37 an hour, say that happens on a monthly clip. So we're looking at a
Mm.
little over a grand a month. Is this worth a little over a grand a month? And then what are they going to charge me to do that? Are they going to charge me 20 grand, 50 grand to do this thing that's going to save me a grand a month? So the payoff period is going to be multiple years. That doesn't make any sense. Why do that? Right now, the part that they miss is where could you reallocate those hours if they're not being spent there? Right. Because the 30 hours to, let's say you save 30 hours. Well, what are those new 30 hours going to be spent on? And how is that going to change the company? And it might be that what you're doing is you're automating the administrative process around your sales team, and that 30 hours now goes to closing more deals. Okay, so what's the average amount of time that gets spent on closing a new deal, and what's your average deal size? If it takes 2.5 working hours on average to close a new deal, and that new deal is worth $10,000 in lifetime value to you, then getting thirty hours back actually turns into 100 grand plus. And so there's where the real ROI is. That second part is typically where the vast majority of the ROI actually lives. And it's not about cutting costs, it's about the reallocation of labor to things that are more efficient and more effective from a revenue generation basis. And that's really the proper way to look at these things. It's not how can I make the current state more efficient, it's what could the future state be and how do I get there?
And what about maintaining these solutions, Isaac? Because one thing is go live with this, but this will need maintenance. Basically, to keep these AI solutions running as accurate or efficient as we need, we know that there is documentation, training. I mean, this is the work continues in that from that
Of
point of
course.
view, right?
Yeah, of course. So, what it really comes down to when it comes to maintenance is, first of all, I mean, obviously, I'm biased as an AI implementer myself, but I see a lot of organizations that try to do internal builds, and the devil is really in the details
Um,
because the average competent professional, a technical executive, they can probably study up and get 80, 90% of the way there on something that they're trying to do completely on their own. But it's that last 10% that's really going to make or break you. And having a dedicated team of people who have been there, done that, who are able to run the support and able to be there is very, very important. And then it comes down to professionalism of management. It's, is everything documented properly? Do you have error codes associated with all of the different failure modes? If it fails in a way that is unexpected, does that get documented? How does the ticketing system work? How does remediation work? Is there a workflow if your AI system is touching customers to ensure that a problem with that system doesn't result in customer churn? There's a lot of different things that you need to plan for, and it's really the whole thing where you plan for the worst but expect the best. And that planning for the worst is super duper important because you never really know what's going to happen. And even if you design a system to be very, very sophisticated, very deterministic, there's only so much determination you can get, especially out of a system that is going to be using something that is generative, right? So designing around non-determinate systems is, it's very complex. It's not the same as designing a traditional system, and pe- making sure you have people who understand the difference is very important.
Yeah, good stuff. And it makes me think, let's say that we're going through that project, right? You and your team as helping that organization to implement it. We are ready to go live. What are those metrics that you and your company are usually looking for to measure the quality of the implementation as far as what is expected from the AI? I know the businesses that you're working with probably they have their own goals, But just curious to hear from you how that works, how that interaction works between what you expect and what the customer needs.
Yeah, for sure. So pre go live, there's a wide battery of tests. Of course, we have user acceptance testing, making sure it works the way that the end user expects it to. But then above that, you have anomaly testing. So if you run the same query over and over and over again, are you going to get the same results or different results?
Mm,
And if you get differing results, do any lie outside the range of acceptability?
okay.
You have like adversarial tests. So trying to get the system to do something it's not supposed to do and making sure that the system does not do things that it's not supposed to do. Really funny example that I saw one time is whenever the whole AI chatbot on your website was a new thing, there were memes going around of people asking, to solve differential equations and asking, oh, where can I order a pizza and stuff on like some random customer support website for like a software company. It's like, oh yeah, you can order pizza over here. That's not what you want. That makes you a meme, right?
Absolutely, you don't want
So so that's not what you want at all. And then there's also load testing, right? So especially if you're looking at deploying something at scale, if you're going to have 10,000 simultaneous jobs, 100,000 simultaneous jobs, well, did you make sure that you can actually have those many jobs? Did you try it repeatedly? Did you try 10 times that amount to make sure that even an unexpected burst load, or even if there's something unexpected, you have redundancy there? If you have something built on scalable architecture that's serverless, did you make sure that every single instance of that serverless architecture is going to spin up? And if you spin up 100,000 instances at once and 1% of them fail, is it easy to go through that 1% that failed? That 100, is it able to are you able to navigate that 100 and immediately understand what went wrong and why and write stopgaps around those? And these are the kinds of things that you have to be ready for and that you need to test ahead of go live, because all of these things will happen in the real world and you don't want to get caught with your pants down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quality, quantity, right? And it makes me think also when projects are running, usually there is a challenge, right? Depending on the implementation of the project, on the amount of data that is used to test any product or system, right? I'm curious to hear from you if in an AI implementation, having or not having access to the same amount of data that is used in production, it makes a difference or not.
So it depends on the use case. For the most part, you want your data that you're testing and training on to be completely representative of the data that is being used in production. If there's some kind of bureaucratic process or some kind of sensitivity around being able to get access to production data, then you do need to make data that behaves in such a way that is similar to production data. It has to be, you want to have as close to the real thing as you possibly can if you can't have the real thing. And in general, you want to just try to get the real thing. So let's say you have a big customer database, but you can't run anything against the customer database because of the security specifications that you have with those MSAs. Well, could you go to a limited number of those clients and see if you can use their data in an isolated test environment that is not going to be around the real world? Or could you ask those customers if you redacted different information, if you could still use the same information set? There's always room for negotiation around that, and those are the kinds of negotiations that are worth having.
Got it. All important information, especially around data. It's extremely important, especially when working with these AI solutions. And let's talk a little bit, Isaac, about change management, right? And why do you think we humans, even though it's in our nature, sometimes being reluctant to change? Why do you think in times of AI implementation, it's even more important having a good change management in place to for the project to be successful?
Well, if you don't have good change management in place and you have people who are trying to do both the old way and the new way at the same time, and something goes wrong, it's going to be much harder to track down exactly what went wrong and why. And every time something goes wrong, that adds more justification to the team of people who do not want to change in order to continue to reinforce not changing. And if you are attempting to do a change and you have a mounting amount of evidence against why you should not, then that's going to cause widespread disillusionment, really bad morale problems. You might start to run into employee attrition problems. And if your company is big enough and you're in the public eye enough, those problems could be very big. I mean, we've all seen how like the safety officers, the AI safety officers leaving OpenAI, what does that make you think of OpenAI? Nothing good, right?
Mhm.
Or what does it when you see like the chief operating officer of a company leave because of AI implementation and they don't feel like that's going well. It's like, what does that do to your company image? If your customer base is really dependent on your image and your customer loyalty also is affected by your image because there's, brand toxicity that could go there, this could very quickly spiral into something that gets extraordinarily out of control. So what seems like an internal change management issue until it's handled poorly, and then it can very quickly become very public.
Can agree more. And in times, we talk about data, we talk about change management, and who owns what. And many organizations and everybody's asking this question lately. So, who should be responsible for owning the outcome? When I come from a customer support background, right? So I know in my team who owns the outcome because for the processes that are very human, a human owns the outcome. When it gets tricky, I'm already hearing people talking about this more and more, and organization having challenges with this is if you are not running with the process end to end and you have AI in between 50, 60, 70% of it, at the end of the day, who owns the outcome?
I mean, it would be whoever is in charge of that process, right? And the person who is in charge of that process needs to be empowered to own the outcome. They need to understand everything that is required in order to ensure that the outcome is successful. And if they need technical support, then they need that technical support team underneath them. And that's another thing that I see go wrong very often is let's say that you had process that took 20 people, maybe it was like an inventory control, accounts payable, some kind of process that's very repetitive, very administrative heavy, and you moved from 20 people to 2 people because you automated most of it with artificial intelligence. It's like, okay, well, do those 2 people know how to deal with things when they go wrong? Are there
Mhm.
manual overrides in place where they can go in and handle that? Are there monitoring systems that will proactively alert them when something goes wrong so that they don't find out that something went wrong after it's been too long and there's nothing that can really be done about it and you just have to eat the damage? It's really important to make sure that, I mean, this goes back to the planning for things to go wrong, planning for the worst, right? It's, is there any situation in which there is in exposure to, if something was to go wrong with this process, you're in a situation where the problem cannot be remedied in an amount of time that's acceptable? And if the answer to that question is yes, then I mean, you have an exposure that you need to deal with and you need to deal with it sooner rather than later, because anybody who's been in business for long enough knows that not only will the worst case scenario happen, it is kind of to be expected. And so
Mm.
you have to plan for that.
Yeah, it's very important. Even when you may not like it, you own it. Even when you may not be responsible for 100% of it, but it's at the end of the day, it's like I see like any other process, right? Even if it's a human being making a mistake, but if you own that process, it's on you to figure things out. You just need to learn how the tool is working and how the automation is behaving and make sure that you plan around it. Isaac, I have another question for you regarding hallucinations. In your world, when you are implementing these projects, how is that measured? How is that managed? And how is that remediated? Curious to hear your thoughts on part, which I think is critical for success of these LLMs.
Yeah, so in general, there are two main things that you need to do in order to make sure that you don't have hallucination problems. The first thing is when you're designing the system from the very beginning, you want to make sure that your outcomes are as deterministic as possible. And so, even in situations where you're using artificial intelligence to do something such as flag an anomaly or do something such as make a decision in an ambiguous way, it's like, okay, well, the decisions to be made, there should be a finite number of them and there should be clear understanding and reasoning as to why. One of the little tricks that you can do whenever you design an AI system is for every decision that it makes or for every output that it makes, make it give you the justification as to why it made that decision as well.
Mm.
And even if that isn't something that goes outward, if that gets put in a log or something, this does make a situation where the LLM has to self correct or self justify, and that can cut down on hallucination rate. The second one, which is also very important, is you want to ground your models and you want to ensure that anything that you're doing has some kind of source justification. You can do this in the same way that you do the logical chain, but what you want to do is, let's say you have an inventory control management system, right? And what you're trying to do is you are saying, when inventory gets below a certain level based on the current demand that I've seen over XYZ period, this is when the reorder point should hit, right? The last thing you want is to not have a reorder hit point,
Right.
like a reorder point hit when you want, or have it hit way in advance when you don't even have space in your warehouse, right? So if you have the AI say, not only choose the reorder point, but provide the actual data and justification as to why the trigger was hit, then you can get the information back. It's like, oh, the trigger was hit because of this reason. And it's not enough to have that just go into the logs. You want the LLM itself. It's like, tell me why you are taking action. And if you can have the LLM tell you why it's taking action or where it got the data from or what it went to and have it link back to that data source. That's also very important, right? Because
Mm.
it is less likely that the AI is going to make up a source that you have already dictated, hey, you must pull from these sources. Because if you design your system right, it's going to go to that source in the first place to determine whether or not you whether or not it's going to make a given decision. So if you require data to be input into the system or some kind of data gathering process to be part of the decision making process before the decision is made, and the decision is made based on data that is coming in externally, that's going to greatly reduce the hallucination problem as well.
Great stuff. Good to hear all about that. And I think those are very, very good points to always take into consideration if you want to kind of test and pressure test these solutions, right? It's a good way of going that in that regards is, as you were saying, to ask the AI for an explanation of why that decision or how it came up with that decision. Good stuff. So I want to talk to you next a little bit, Isaac, about something that companies, founders, everyone at some point will have to make a decision, which is buy it, build it yourself, or a blend between them. Basically, we are trying to implement an AI solution. Some organizations are leaning towards more like building in house or actually buying it and then implement it, or a blend of both. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you see as working on each one of them, and what would be your recommendation to go one way or the other, and how to approach it?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually just made a long form YouTube video about exactly this topic a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
But so in general, the answer is buy it. It's either buy it or buy
Mm.
a couple of different tools and then tie them together with some kind of custom middleware. Building from scratch yourself almost never makes sense. And the reason it almost never makes sense is twofold. So the first part is it typically will only make sense if the ownership of the intellectual property is very important and the solution that you're creating is truly novel and is giving you some kind of competitive advantage that is truly sophisticated. It's something that is part of a longer term strategy. This is something that you're basing your entire organization around, or it's something that you're going to sell. Like you're planning on making this system to sell its outputs or to sell access to the system directly. In those cases, it might make sense to build it. But in general, you don't want to build it because you have to go through the software iteration process of making a V1, releasing the V1, having all of the problems with the V1, then creating a V2, then having problems with the V2, and then maybe the dynamic changes, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people that you're going to hire if you're trying to build it yourself, these are people who have done builds inside of corporations and they might have 10, 15 years of software develop experience, senior software developer, 300 grand a year, Mac Daddy, sure. right? But
No.
this character has most likely not built many artificial intelligence solutions and is not a specialist in building artificial intelligence solutions for your use case. That's very rare that you're going to find that person. And if you do find that person or that team, it's going to be significantly more expensive than it would be to just hire it outright. So in for most cases, even if you are trying to do something that's relatively novel, what you do is you find all of the components that do the different pieces that you need, and then you build a middleware solution that ties all of those together. And a traditional software developer that might have a little bit of AI experience is going to know how to do this
Mm.
in a much easier way than like building a AI system from scratch. And if you are building an AI system from scratch, and this is really like we're talking about building a large language model with a transformer from the very beginning, right? If you are doing something like that, there are specialist firms that do just that that have a lot more experience than you're going to be able to hire in the market to do it. So there are some cases in which you want to do like build it in house, but I would say 95% of the time the answer is to either buy it or configure something.
Well, 95% is high.
95% of implementations fail because people try to do them themselves.
There you go. It should make people think. It's like building a product, right, Isaac? It's like, I mean, do you really want to spend time, energy, resources on starting from scratch on building this? And as you were saying, it's the technical capabilities. It's do you have everything in house? So it's a lot of things to take into consideration.
I would say most of the projects we get where we're coming in halfway where it didn't get done was attempts to build it in house.
And then they are trying to scrap that and reaching out to you so you can go take them to the other route. Hmm.
Yes.
Interesting. And that take me to the next question, right? A decision is made, right? Okay, I'm not going to build it in house. It's too much work based on what I'm hearing today. Let's go to make a decision on who is going to be the vendor. Which LLMs are we going to use? How is that working out there? We have multiple companies, right? That we all know who they are. But how is that decision come? What is triggering decision going one way or the other? Is it money? Is it a capability? What are the things that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so there's kind of two flavors of this question, right? The first one is how do I choose the right people to build this for me or the right product, right? And then the other one is how do I choose between commercial large language models that all seem the same? So to answer the first one, just very, very explicitly, because I've spent thousands of hours in each of them, OpenAI is traditionally overhyped, especially their latest releases. They just don't really measure up properly. They are more of a marketing play than anything else. And I hate to be like, the OpenAI hater, but I personally
You're crushing my chat GPT
I've
right now.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I personally do not believe in the direction of the organization. And if you look at the benchmarking since GPT 5.2, they have decided that they're going to do all of their benchmarks against previous versions of their own software. And the reason they do all of the benchmarks against previous versions of their own software is because they can no longer compete with other software options. So if you look back in the past, it used to be, oh, how does our model compare to Anthropic's model and compare to Google's model? They don't do that anymore because they can't compete, just straight up. It's just not as good.
Wow.
Now, Gemini, the Google
Yep.
models, those are the best use case whenever what you're doing is very deterministic and the outputs are not going to be something that is focused on communication. And the reason for this is the way that they have trained their models is they train more based on trying to emulate the sophistication of decision making. And so if it's about getting some kind of data in and then determining what to do with that data and push it out, then that's going to be the best use case for that. Anthropic and the Claude ecosystem, that is primarily around a narrative. So a lot of their stuff is about making communications that actually sound human, the ability to steer the voicing of the model, Their coding implementations, they're starting to go in that direction. Those are very impressive as well now. I personally am a big Anthropic fan of all of the stuff that I've seen. I think that what they're doing is what I believe in the most. And then XAI, Grok, stuff like that. That is the best use case if what you're doing operates in an area that you may have some kind of censorship issue or run into some kind of guardrails with other AI systems that you're not like it's not necessarily an actual issue, but they get flagged, overly. So an example of this would be, let's say that you want to create a system that is supposed to be like a psychological self-rescue system. So if somebody is having a really bad time, they're in a crisis, panic type of situation, and they need to talk through the issue that they're having, it might make sense to build that on a system like XAI instead of building that on one of the other models, for the sheer fact that what you don't want to happen is you don't want an output that could be helpful
Mm.
be blocked because it's talking about something that is considered to be like sensitive. So like
Mhm.
if you're talking somebody down from making a very bad decision, you don't want the output to be like, oh well, we can't say that because that's not appropriate. It's like, well, it's appropriate in this exact situation, right?
Um,
And so you're not going to run into those kinds of problems with X where you might run into those problems with other vendors.
Bunch of good information there. You're making me think about the future of my chat GPT. I have to think about, especially with everything going on with OpenAI lately. So thanks for sharing that, Isaac. And let's say we go with Anthropic. The system is implemented, and a couple years from now, things are going south. How does this work? Can you switch an LLM, put another one in? It's a brand new project. If something goes wrong for whatever reason, the company is not keeping up with the quality of the LLM. What would happen in those cases?
Yeah, so we always build everything to be model agnostic, where what we do is, it's like it's all an API interface. And so we just build our API interface where you can just switch out what you're using and then it just uses a different code and goes to a different system. And then we'll typically compare systems against each other whenever we're doing testing in order to choose which one's right. In the vast majority of cases, Anthropic ends up being right for most of the use cases we use because most of our use cases are operational and do require some type of abstract logic. And abstract logic is really where Anthropic can, kind of shine in comparison to something like Gemini. I'd say 90% of the time you're choosing between those two, it's either going to be a Gemini or an Anthropic. Gemini is much better at long context. So if you have like very, very long context that you need to analyze, it's going to be better for that. And then if you have outputs that are going to be in non-English in like non traditional English lettering format. So it's like if you need to get an output that's going to be in Arabic or in Mandarin or something like that, then Gemini is going to be better for stuff like that. But anyway, I mean, I could go on and on about these specific use cases of which model is best for which, just because I have so much experience with that. But in general, what you want to do is you want to build your backend so that you can swap out very, very easily, where it's as easy as changing a variable in your code base. And then if you do get to the point where you're looking at, potentially selling this or doing something that requires more complete ownership, then if you have your backend set up in that way, you can switch to an open model. You can host
Mhm.
that open model within your own founded narrative. So a lot of their stuff is about making communications that actually sound human, the ability to steer the voicing of the model. Their coding implementations, they're starting to go in that direction. Those are very impressive as well now. I personally am a big Anthropic fan of all of the stuff that I've seen. I think that what they're doing is what I believe in the most. And then XAI, Grok, stuff like that. That is the best use case if what you're doing operates in an area that you may have some kind of censorship issue or run into some kind of guardrails with other AI systems that you're not like it's not necessarily an actual issue, but they get flagged, overly. So an example of this would be, let's say that you want to create a system that is supposed to be like a psychological self-rescue system. So if somebody is having a really bad time, they're in a crisis, panic type of situation, and they need to talk through the issue that they're having, it might make sense to build that on a system like XAI instead of building that on one of the other models, for the sheer fact that what you don't want to happen is you don't want an output that could be helpful
Mm.
be blocked because it's talking about something that is considered to be, like sensitive. So like
Mhm.
if you're talking somebody down from making a very bad decision, you don't want the output to be like, oh well, we can't say that because that's not appropriate. It's like, well, it's appropriate in this exact situation, right?
Um,
And so you're not going to run into those kinds of problems with X where you might run into those problems with other vendors.
a bunch of good information there. You're making me think about of my chat GPT. I have to think about, especially with everything going on with OpenAI lately. So thanks for sharing that, Isaac. And let's say we go with Anthropic. The system is implemented, and a couple years from now, things are going south. How does this work? Can you switch an LLM, put another one in? It's a brand new project. If something goes wrong, if for whatever reason the company is not keeping up with the quality of the LLM, what would happen in those cases?
Yeah, so we always build everything to be model agnostic, where
Okay.
what we do is, it's like it's all an API interface. And so we just build our API interface where you can just switch out what you're using and then it just uses a different code and goes to a different system. And then we'll typically compare systems against each other whenever we're doing testing in order to choose which one's right. In the vast majority of cases, Anthropic ends up being right for most of the use cases we use because most of our use cases are operational and do require some type of abstract logic. And abstract logic is really where Anthropic can, kind of shine in comparison to something like Gemini. I'd say 90% of the time you're choosing between those two, it's either going to be a Gemini or an Anthropic. Gemini is much better at long context. So if you have like very, very long context that you need to analyze, it's going to be better for that. And then if you have outputs that are going to be in non-English in like non traditional English lettering format. So it's like if you need to get an output that's going to be in Arabic or in Mandarin or something like that, then Gemini is going to be better for stuff like that. But anyway, I mean, I could go on and on about these specific use cases of which model is best for which, just because I have so much experience with that. But in general, what you want to do is you want to build your backend so that you can swap out very, very easily, where it's as easy as changing a variable in your code base. And then if you do get to the point where you're looking at, potentially selling this or doing something that requires more complete ownership, then if you have your backend set up in that way, you can switch to an open model. You can host that open model within your own cloud instance. So if you're running like AWS or Azure Cloud or you're running Google Cloud, you can just put everything up in there and you can build an API interface on top of that that works exactly the same way. So I'd just say remain flexible so that whatever the latest and greatest is, you can just switch it out when you need to.
But is there a potential downtime while these LLMs are training the new data, new processes? Where if for whatever reason I decided exiting what I have and getting another LLM, um, it's there a learning period, something a training period that they can just pick up on and unplug. It's kind of plug and play in a way.
Yeah, so I'd say most use cases are going to be plug and play. In use cases that are a little bit more nuanced, if you run into that, of course, you want to
Mm,
do a lot of testing on what you're going to move to, and you don't want to do a cutover until you are sure that that's going to work. But if you're installing an open model and you're transitioning over to that, there might be more of a lift there, just because you have to deal with self-hosting and
mm,
provisioning of your stack and everything. But in general, you prevent downtime by just not doing the cutover until you're sure that everything's going to work properly. And then if you design your backend where the cutover is changing a variable from one API key to another API key, then I mean, the cutover itself is a matter of a couple seconds.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Absolutely, especially if you need to test it. That's always what the dev environment should be there for. Cloud versus on-prem infrastructure. How the different flavors work lately.
Yeah, so this is something that you run into a lot is a lot of people think that they need an on-prem solution. Unless you're a government contractor or
Hmm.
working for the government or you're just absurdly massive. Like if you're in the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in annual recurring revenue, maybe you need an on-prem solution. But typically, the drive towards an on prem solution is about security risk and the desire to make sure that the security protocols are in place properly. And you can cover all your bases with like the traditional systems that are out there. AWS is FedRAMP approved. They run top secret clearance government systems in AWS. They run top secret government clearance systems in Google Cloud, right? So
Mm.
there's no real security, like, advantages that you can get on-prem that you can't get on cloud unless it's explicitly required by your client or by your use case. We have to be on-prem. The the more common use case, which is still, kind of overblown, is self-hosted LLM versus commercial LLM. Now, back to my ChatGPT hate. I would not do anything with sensitive data related to ChatGPT because especially since they're now doing advertising and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. There's only so much that I'm willing to say on a podcast that could be publicized, but I wouldn't trust putting sensitive data there. That's all I'm gonna say.
I
Um,
wouldn't. I wouldn't
yeah,
in any of
I
them. I mean, it's
yeah,
sensitive is sensitive. It should be as private as possible or highly secure,
yeah.
whatever that is. Yes, I agree.
Now, these organizations are willing to do things such as sign business associate agreements with you if you need HIPAA compliance. They are willing to do NDAs and they're willing to do enterprise level agreements, especially if you are, like a power user. I know that on all of the platforms where, like tier five users, we spend tens of thousands of dollars a month with all of them, right? And
Uh,
so we have like an enterprise agreement with Anthropic where they guarantee us that we have our own isolated environment if we need to use it and stuff like that, right?
got it.
But you can do those kinds of things if the main issue is legal exposure and you want to make sure that you're covered legally in case something happens and you need that for your insurances. But if it's something where you would be held liable directly regardless of what happens and there is no way for you to get out of that liability, then you would want an on-prem solution.
Got it. And when it gets to these negotiations, right? Yeah, are the contracts between the end customer and directly these AI companies, or sometimes you are in the middle? And how is that this negotiation takes place?
No, the negotiation is between the organization that is building the tool and the
The
and the
customer.
LLM provider. So,
Yeah.
as an example, none of my clients are on the enterprise agreement that I have with Anthropic if
Yeah.
I'm using the Anthropic API for them. That's between me and Anthropic, right? But, what's where the devil's in the details is in the MSAs that I sign with my clients, it's like if there is some kind of breach of data
Yeah.
while the data is in our systems, then we are liable. But if there's some kind of, breach of data that would be related to the
Their
LLM
environment, right?
provider,
Mm.
then the issue is like, okay, well, you can't use our data to train your model. It's like, okay, we can't use our data to train our model. So then I have an agreement with Anthropic. You can't use anything I send you to train your model. Right. And then let's say that they do. Well, I get sued and then the lawsuit becomes pass through. I get sued and then I sue Anthropic because they screwed me and that's why I screwed them. Right. And so you absolve yourself from responsibility from a legal standpoint so long as you have your contracts buttoned up across the board and anything you're offering your clients you're also making sure you're being offered as the provider.
Yeah, because sometimes people say, "Yeah, okay, we have that in a contract, but how do we know that they are not using our data for testing or training their model? Well, we really don't know, right? At the
Just-
end of the day, but it's the liability that they take on their organization if something goes wrong. Isn't how you feel about these?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I feel about it, especially, the further I get in the business world and the more I learn about the way that things actually work as an entrepreneur, it's just, there are the legal liabilities of whether or not something happens, and then there's whether or not it actually happens.
Yeah.
And the question of whether or not it actually happens, the answer is probably, because I mean, what kinds of things happen behind closed doors where nobody knows and then people are incentivized financially to do it? All sorts of things, right? All sorts of things. But what the question really is there going to be some kind of financial or legal exposure if XYZ thing happens, and am I protected from that financial or legal exposure? And if the answer is yes, then for all intents and purposes, that's it, right?
Mhm.
And to say it's anything less than that is to either just be of that's just kind of like some moral superiority public positioning thing. It's not real. It's
Yeah.
not real,
Yeah.
you know?
Especially in the world business, right? So
Yeah.
oh, good stuff. Thanks for sharing all that, Isaac. And while we approach to the last section of our conversation, I have a few questions for you. It's kind of one question, but for different groups, just to get your thoughts on what you think and we should go. And the first one is, what would be your piece of advice for really individuals learning AI today?
Okay, so my biggest piece of advice is the best way to really learn how an AI system works is to just build one. Because there's a lot of people who have all of these courses, and
Mhm.
there are some things to learn. You need to learn about when to expect hallucinations and how the APIs work and how you can root up a system that is going to, be sufficient in order to do things. There is some knowledge to be gained in learning, just system architecture and solution architecture and stuff. But the only way you're going to really learn how to make an AI system that provides real value is to try and to have it not work and to try again and to have that not work and to see where all of the little nitty gritty things are. And that's why, I mean, personally, whenever I go out to hire people, I don't even hire based on years of experience anymore. I just say, what projects have you done and what have you
Mhm.
learned, and can I see your GitHub, essentially, right? Because that's the only way to really know what somebody knows in this space. Um, and yeah, I mean, if you need a way to do that that isn't going to be high risk, do it on your own business, right? If
Right.
you're looking to learn AI and you're looking to, become an AI provider, then do you need to automate your outreach? Try to automate your outreach. Do it poorly and make a lot of people mad. Then figure out how to do it
Yes.
right. Automate your finances. Have that mess up. Run
Yeah.
into a big problem with that. Learn your lesson and do it again. Right.
Don't
That's
be
what it
afraid on
is.
failing, right? Because that's at the
Yeah.
end of the day how we learn. Yeah,
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly.
Your piece of advice, Isaac, for companies thinking on implementing AI in their organizations.
Okay. So my piece of advice for companies looking to implement AI in their organizations. So when okay, so at the top down from the least technical to the most technical. From the least technical, make sure you really understand what it is you're trying to do and look at the problem and derive the solution from the problem. Do not try to create a solution and fit it to the problem, because the marketing in the AI space is all about all of these solutions and all of these things that you can do. And oh my God, look at the
Yeah.
unlock potential, right? But that unlock potential might not actually matter for you, right? Do you actually need that? So that's something, is to like really be problem first focused. The second thing is to be extra careful on anything where the outputs of a generative AI system, an LLM, is going to be directly interfacing with your customer base. So anywhere where the LLM is going to be handling communication channels directly, you have to pay very close attention to that. You have to really test that to death because that is the most likely failure mode. And then the third is when you're designing the AI system, try to make as few nodes in the tree of the way that your system works actually dependent on the artificial intelligence. So what I mean by this is let's say that you're creating a system that is going to search through all your company data and tell you things based on your company data, right?
Mhm.
The wrong way to do that is to just pipe all of your company data into a vector database and then put an LLM on top of it and then
Yeah.
just ask the LLM
Yeah.
questions. The right way to do this is to ask a question and then have all of the different places that your data is stored and what you're looking for and have the model determine, okay, based on this query, what data do I need to get and where do I need to
Mhm.
get it from? And then hit the API calls that bring that data into one place and then actually answer the question based on the data that's been consolidated into the one place. The former version that I spoke of, very easy to set up. It's going to be right about 50% of the time. The
Yeah.
latter version I set up, quite a bit more complex to set up, but it's going to be right like 95% of the time. So
Maybe
that's the option that you want.
more time up front, but more reliable and accurate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. And what would be your piece of advice to policymakers and governments navigating through this time? What do you want to see on that area?
I would say that it is naive to believe that we are going to be able to reduce the amount of intelligence that an artificial intelligence system has over time because it is incentivized to make a more intelligent system. And so the best way to combat the oh well what if AI gets super duper powerful and no longer needs us? The right way to handle that doomsday situation is to narrow the scope in which the systems operate instead of attempting to minimize the intelligence or put guardrails around this intelligence. If you minimize the environment in which the operation occurs, that is how you actually contain it. But if you're trying to put rails on something that's not contained, that's just not going to work.
The last question that I had is when is efficiency enough? But now that you're mentioning environment and containing there, is that ever going to be possible based on where we are and where we're heading towards?
I think I think that it is possible, but I do not think that it is incentivized. And
Mm,
I think that one of the biggest issues that we see related to, how to ensure AI alignment moving forward and like
yeah.
what's going to happen with all of this is pretty reminiscent of what we just see in society at large, which is people don't do what is right, so to speak. They do what has the most incentive to be done. And so the question to really consider and what policymakers and lawmakers and everybody really needs to consider is it does it make more sense to just like essentially break monopolized AI services where there's AI that can do pretty much everything and create portfolios of specialized AIs that operate in a very specific domain. Because if we can achieve this kind of
Mm,
bifurcation of responsibilities,
yeah.
then it's possible to prevent the worst outcomes, or it's more likely to prevent the worst projected outcomes. But the all-powerful, all-knowing system that can communicate with everybody, like that holy grail of the doom
Yeah.
sphere version of this. It's like, well, the I am an AI bull rather than an AI bear when it comes to the future. But as far as the bearish perspective is concerned, the all-powerful, all-knowing system is like that is the system that becomes the bear version, right? And so if we can split that up into subsystems, then we have a better chance of avoiding misalignment.
Seeing anyone going in that direction. I haven't seen it myself. I think everybody's trying to rush so they are not left behind.
Yeah, everyone's trying to rush so they're not left behind, and there's been the emergence of all of these applications of artificial intelligence that are not super duper ethical, but are
Mhm.
very profitable. And I think that the leaders of the space have a lot of power on their hands
Yeah.
because it is to them to
Um,
determine what use cases can be used or not. And you know, if you look at what OpenAI has decided to do versus what Anthropic has decided to do versus what Gemini has decided to do versus what X has decided to do, it becomes pretty clear pretty fast where the heads of the leaders of these organizations are at. And you know, I hope the good guys win.
that's all we can do sometime. It's really hope for the best
Yep.
in a way. And but thank you. I know we're just at the end of this, Isaac, and probably we will have another 1 or 2 hours to continue talking about all this. So really appreciate all the insights and this conversation that you have brought to us. Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And remember, this is the human protocol, and the code may change, but our humanity will continue to be the constant. And thank you all for tuning in, and talk soon. Take care, everyone.